To receive an award, Jerry, with your name on it, with previous recipients, including Tim Fincham and Jim Autry, is a very high honor, and I appreciate that. Jim Beatty, thank you for thinking of me. I think I generally agree with everything that's been said. I think it's a little over the top, but so be it. But Jim, the fact that you thought of me in this context means the world to me. Mike Cooper, I think you know how I feel about you. There's nobody in the game that I'm aware of that's put more time, effort, and personal funds into trying to create greater diversity and inclusion and equity in the game than Mike Cooper. If there is, I don't know who that person is. Craig Kirby, thank you for those kind words. It's interesting how you meet people in life, and Craig, you just always had that twinkle in your eye. Your energy was tremendous, and I do remember that day that we met in May of 2014, and I'm so glad 11 years later how Golf My Future and my game has continued to progress and grow so dramatically. So I first want to say that I'm extremely pleased with what's happening in the golf industry now with respect to DE&I. Specifically the Make Golf Your Thing effort and the specific efforts around Make Golf Your Game, Make Golf Your Career, Make Golf Your Business are tremendous. And I applaud the commissioners and/or CEOs of the LPGA, the PGA of America, the PGA Tour, and the USGA for their commitment. For the resources that they've put behind it. It seems to me for the first time in a long time that we actually have some things hardwired now into the game that are not going to be sort of the flavor of the month, and that's tremendous. And I also want to recognize, while I'm at it, the Augusta National Golf Club and the Masters Tournament Foundation. While they're not a formal part of Make Golf Your Thing, they're doing some pretty impactful things in Augusta, whether it's the local college, whether it's the local golf course. So don't think that Augusta National doesn't have a heart for what's going on with respect to DE&I, so I did want to mention them as well. And even though he's not here, I want to recognize Andrew Yeast, my colleague for 6 years. Andrew's moved on to a new position with the North Florida PGA as their new executive director, but for that period of time, he helped to administer Make Golf Your Thing. He kept things moving, and he deserves a lot of credit. But I also want to recognize that, I'll just speak for myself, a lot of us suffer from recency bias, and so not to diminish in any way what's happened with respect to Make Golf Your Thing, which is great, but I do think it's important to understand the historical context to what got us to where we are today. So at the risk of sounding like that old guy that just wants to talk about back in my day, I did want to take you on a little bit of a journey, and I'm just going to relate it to my own experience with diversity, inclusion, and equity in the game. And it actually goes back to 1983. So Jerry mentioned we met in 1981. In 1983, I became the executive director, as he mentioned, of the Georgia State Golf Association in Atlanta. At the time that I arrived, there were no women who were members of the association, and there were no public golf courses that were members of the association. So it was effectively a private club association for men, and to be candid about it, white men. So we immediately took steps to welcome women into the organization and to welcome public golf courses into the organization. And not only did that obviously boost our membership rolls, it also created a whole new dynamic within the association. The women got involved right away. Many of them went on to serve as president of the GSGA. Took a little longer from the public golf sector, and candidly a little longer for full integration of people of color into the organization, but that's happened. In fact, right now, Ralph Stokes is the president of the GSGA. He's the first African-American president in its nearly 100-year history. So progress, sometimes slow, but progress nonetheless. In 1994, as Jerry mentioned, I became the CEO of the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. That organization, just based upon kind of how things evolved over time, if you looked at the profile of a golf course superintendent, pretty much white male. We couldn't really impact that directly, but we took a lot of measures both to impact our diversity at the staff level. Our staff was about 120 people. Now we were in Lawrence, Kansas, which isn't exactly a hotbed of diversity on its own, But we hired, some of you may remember the late Lainey Griffin. She was our first DE&I officer. It wasn't even called that back then. But she helped us both from a staff perspective and a membership perspective. So what we did was we tried to engender more interest in the profession among students and other people entering the profession, knowing that over time they would ascend to golf course superintendent roles. And I'm proud to tell you, this was after my time, that Rafael Barajas became the first Hispanic president of the GCSA. That's been 5-7 years or so ago. Here's one thing you need to know about Rafael. When he moved to the United States, he's a Mexican national. He did not speak English. Think about that. But he became the president of the GCSA approximately 25 years later. Pretty impressive. Later, GCSA, and this was after my time, undertook an initiative to bring more women into the industry. They have a women's leadership forum now. There hasn't yet been a female president of GCSAA, but that time's coming. In 2008, as Mike mentioned, I joined the World Golf Foundation. And as Mike mentioned, despite my best efforts, or at least I thought my best efforts, we were actually never able to get any formal funding for DE&I. As Mike mentioned, we started out, and in fact, it was going to be Mike. I wanted to hire a director of diversity to basically work with all the governing bodies who the board of the World Golf Foundation, if you're not familiar, consists of the commissioner of the LPGA, the chairman of the Masters Tournament, the CEO of the PGA of America, the commissioner of the PGA Tour, the CEO of the USGA, the CEO of the RNA, Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews, Scotland, and the commissioner of the PGA European Tour. I was not successful, but as Mike mentioned, we were able to do things basically on a shoestring. A few people, I'm going to mention a few people here in a moment, but I do want to mention specifically Dr. Bill Crouch, who at the time was the president of Georgetown College, not Georgetown University, Renee Powell, who probably all of you know, and the late Franco Harris, of all people. They were at the first organizational meeting we held back at the World Golf Foundation, probably in 2009. It was great having Franco there because Franco could draw a crowd, let me tell you, but he did also bring some visibility and even credibility to the effort. So that was the launch point. Mike, as he mentioned, he's extremely modest. Mike became the first chair of the Diversity Task Force, and he took that on with great enthusiasm, as you only have to spend a minute with him to know that he would. It's interesting, we created 4 different areas of focus. They were suppliers to the golf industry, careers in the golf industry, competitive play, and recreational play. That was in 2000, probably 9, I'm guessing at that point, probably. And it was interesting that all these years later, when Make Golf Your Thing organized, they had those same 3 categories. So it seemed like some vindication for how we organized it back in the day. Suppliers, so Gina Rizzi, some of you know Gina, she took that on. We conducted the first diverse suppliers forum at the World Golf Hall of Fame. Remember, this is with no budget, okay? All these things are happening. Careers, Steve Schloss with the USGA, he's since retired. Some of you know Steve. He kind of took that over. We conducted the first Future Leaders Symposium. In fact, I saw Brandon Johnson last night. He was a member of that class of Future Leaders. Also at that time, and I take no credit for this, but the American Junior Golf Association, Stephen Hamlin, is its head, started the AJGA intern program. That's been tremendous. That had already existed, but they put more of an emphasis on diverse participation in that program. That's led to a lot of people entering into the golf industry that otherwise wouldn't have. Competitive play, we immediately partnered up with the Advocates, now the Advocates PGA. A fellow by the name of Ken Bentley was the head of that at the time. And I have to recognize the PGA Tour here as well. I did go to the tour. We met with Ken, and the vision for the tour, it was very small at the time, was tremendous. And that was one time where I said to the tour, and specifically to Charlie Zink and Ty Votah, we really need to get behind this. And the PGA Tour made a substantial commitment at that time. I think really helped put the Advocates into a different plane. And since then, it's just been unbelievable. The Farmers' involvement, Cisco's involvement, playing on the back end of the Farmers Insurance Classic this weekend, ironically enough. Not lost on me. Also not lost on me that Monday was Martin Luther King Day as well. I'll have something to say about him in a second. And then the AJGA again stepped up with their ACE grant. So a lot happened there. Recreational play, Some of you might recall we started an initiative called Get Golf Ready. That wasn't specifically a diversity initiative, but it did help us in that regard as well. So that's what we did in those 4 areas, again, really with no funding. I do think it's important, and I'm sorry I'm probably going to sound like an old fossil here, but there are a lot of people that have made a lot of tremendous commitments to this effort through the years, and I just want to make sure that they get recognized. So from the minority community, if you will, Mike Cooper, who's here, Mark Lowry, who's here, Renee Powell, Ken Bentley, Jim Beatty, who's here, Craig Kirby, who's here, Wendell Haskins, Ernie Ellison, who's here, John Simpson, Harold Dunovit, Joe Louis Barrow, and then, unfortunately, the late John Merchant, the late Lou Horn, the late Barbara Douglas, and the late Bill Dickey. And look, I thought about this, and I said, anytime you start naming people, you're going to miss some. And I recognize that I probably have, but I can only do it from the standpoint of the people that I interfaced with during my career, and that's a pretty exhaustive list. If I miss somebody, my apologies, but I think I covered the waterfront there. And then from, Jerry used the term when he called me about this award, the majority community, if you will. But there are people there that really could be maybe future recipients of this because they really stepped up. Stephen Hamblin, for sure, with the HAGA. Jerry Tardy, Gina Rizzi, Rick Summers, Steve Schloss, Sandy Cross, and then most recently, Mark Simon. These are all people that did things they didn't have to do. They're fine doing their jobs the way they do them. There wouldn't have been any issue, but they saw the need and just the righteousness, if you will, of stepping up. So I want to leave you with a few thoughts. So I get asked, I was asked several times through the year, so Steve, why is this so important to you? Why do you have this passion for this? And so I give people, as people probably know about me, I tend to speak in threes. But there's a reason for that. People remember things in threes, remember things in threes. So I had 3 answers to why this was so important to me. First of all, it was the right thing to do, okay? So I'm no scientist, I'm no medical doctor, but I do know that 99.9% of our DNA is identical. So all of us in this room, we're basically all the same people. What separates us is 0.1% from a DNA perspective. And I realize DNA is pretty vast, but just think about that for a minute. So my thought was, why should a certain group of people not have access just because of that 0.1%? The second reason, as it relates to this point, was my father, actually. So my dad was successful in business, and later in his career, he was president of the western region of a pretty good-sized manufacturing company that manufactured spices to certain companies. You may have heard of one of their customers, a little company called McDonald's. So it was a pretty big company. My dad ran the western region, and the executive offices were attached to the plant. So I was sort of a nerdy kid in some respects. I played sports, played golf, but I also liked business at a young age. So I was probably about 14 years old. I asked my dad to take me to work one day with him, which he did. So what he would do every day, as he later explained to me, when he would get to work, he would walk through the plant first before he ever walked into his office, okay? That plant, so this is about 71, okay? So I'm giving my age away. Northern California, I will tell you, if it wasn't 100%, it was 99% of those workers in that plant were Hispanic. And I'm pretty sure none of them spoke English as a native language. When my dad walked through there, first of all, he knew everybody. They were coming up to him, hugging him. Back when that wasn't a thing, there were no man hugs going on in 1971. He knew, it was incredible. He knew something about every person. He asked about their kids, the whole thing. So I watched this for about 15 minutes or so. Then we went into his office, and I said to myself then, as a 14-year-old, I said, if I ever get in a position of authority, that's exactly how I'm going to be. So I tried to live up to the example that he set. Second reason, this is more practical, but my job for many years was to drive greater interest and participation in the game, okay? That was my job. So my idea was I wanted all segments of society to have access to our game. Why would you want to have certain segments not have access to it? We were never going to achieve our promise as an industry if we didn't. Reason number 2. Reason number 3, I happen to believe, and I think probably most of you in this room agree, that golf is the greatest game ever invented. I really believe that. I also believe that golf is the greatest industry in which to work. I say this, I've been in the industry now, this is my 45th year. I literally can name on one hand, and I probably have a few fingers left over, either someone I met in golf or played golf with that I'd rather not spend time with again. And trust me, I've met and played golf with thousands of people during that time. It's just that kind of sport and that kind of industry. So I wanted to make sure that everybody in our country would have access to the beautiful game that I think golf is and the wonderful industry it is as well. So I also get asked through the years, or have been asked a number of times, so what can I do to help? All right? So again, I've got 3 answers for you. There are actually 3 quotes. And this first one, Jerry, I don't know if you coined this, but you wrote this in one of your columns, I believe. And that is, what would you do if you had no fear? You remember that? That little quote, by the way, Jerry, you don't know this. When you wrote it, I typed it up and I had it blown up. And right behind my desk, when I came in every single morning, that quote was staring me in the face. And Mike, that helped us do a lot of what we did, because I tried to have no fear as it related to this. Quote number 1. Quote number 2, Martin Luther King Day Monday. I want to quote Martin Luther King Jr. The time is always right to do the right thing. Think about that. The time is always right to do the right thing. That was also a guiding principle. The third quote, and this too, along with Jerry's quote, greeted me every morning when I went into my office. Arthur Ashe. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Now, if everybody did that, we could, whatever the cause is, we could just make such great fundamental difference. But those were the words I tried to live by, and those were words, so for the younger people in the room, if you're wondering, or if you don't have the job title that people like Jerry and I were fortunate enough to have for most of our careers, you can still make a difference. So I wanted to thank you for a couple things. First, thank you for indulging me and letting me give you a little historical perspective on my journey through golf as it related to DE&I. And mostly, thank you for this wonderful honor, which I'll cherish all the rest of the days of my life. Thank you very much.